you with that. Okay, let me start. I'm so glad to be here with Dave to talk about this question about festive philosophy and how classrooms can be fun and productive. And I'm going to start by discussing and separating two dogmas of philosophy education that often get run together. I think it'll help us figure out how to have those more productive and satisfying and fun conversation in class. And if your mind wanders while I talk, you might think about the difference between good conversations and bad conversations. And I'll just say this is kind of about teaching in the age of AI, but on the DL. So, first dogma has to do with the effectiveness of lecture. The dogma is that the best and most efficient way to get students to learn what we want them to learn is to tell them what we think that they should know. Our brains can't really process information all that efficiently, even when we want to learn what's being said, and even when the lecturer is highly engaging. After generations of passive learning, philosophy teachers are starting really to buy into active learning strategies. And my co-panelist here, Dave, has been at the front lines of that mostly bloodless revolution. There's lots of data on this, but I won't bore you with that data. It still can be edifying to think about not just how we teach, but why we teach and what our goals are. So, in the spirit of watering a dead flower, we might want more than just active classes. Part of the problem with lectures is that they can be dull and teacher focused. They consist of here's what I want to tell you often, rather than what do you students want or need to know or to know how to do. But lecture is useful when there is a sage and thirsty audience. If you want a genius's take on something, you might gather at her feet or his. But we philosophy professors are generally not as compelling as K. Dot here. Our students might not all come to class thirsty for our experiences, and we might have other goals for our students. The way we were taught may not be the best way to teach our students. And the world has changed. There are many problems with contemporary media, but one of the beautiful aspects of today's world is that students can learn about anything easily. What's the capital of Jalisco? What's Kant's moral theory called? What are the most important objections to social contract theory? ChatGPT tells me about the latter, that they are implicit consent, unjust systems, and equality of power. The point is, content transmission has never been easier. Many of our students come in knowing something about philosophy, having watched videos or listened to podcasts, and they can easily do more of that, which brings me to the second dogma, which is that the goal of classwork is content transmission. Active learning classrooms can improve student enjoyment and maybe even their retention of content. Indeed, many of the studies that support active learning point to its efficacy in helping students to learn to memorize and to regurgitate. For most of our courses, students can easily become familiar with philosophical terms and concepts, watching YouTube or looking at Wikipedia or listening to Philosophy Bites or whatever podcast.
Hey, Russell.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I am finally in. Keep going.
That's awesome. Thanks. I'm glad you're here, Dave. So what I was saying, students can acquire some content through lots of different means. The proliferation of different kinds of media gives students access to various ways into our philosophical conversations. But typically, their understanding of their content before they come to us is fairly low. Plato, as he so often did, saw this problem clearly. And here from the Phaedrus, he writes, I cannot help feeling, Phaedrus, that writing is unfortunately like painting. For the creations of the painter have the attitude of life, and yet, if you ask them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And the same may be said of podcasts. You would imagine that they had intelligence, but if you want to know anything and put a question to one of them, the speaker always gives one unvarying answer. And when they have been once written down, they are tumbled about anywhere among those who may or may not understand them. Active learning is useful not because it gets us better results at content transmission, even if it does. It's useful because it helps students to understand and to apply concepts and theories and to open their minds to alternative perspectives. We want students, I think, those of us teaching philosophy, to be able to do things, not merely to know things. And we want them to consider other perspectives, not as solemnly silent, but in the full humanity of their peers. We want them to confront difficult problems and our conflicting attitudes toward them. And they cannot get that really from the wealth of media available, even from our beloved philosophy texts. They can't get how to do philosophy without doing it. And philosophical collaboration, when done well, is fun. But we're all familiar with ways that philosophical conversation can fail. It can fail like this. It can fail like that. This is a disappointing thing to see in our classrooms. This is a picture of me in 6th grade when we all agreed that we would be at the library, and there I was on the lower left. And where was everybody? I don't know. We get a lot of this in philosophy, of course. So I'd like to take a moment now to reflect. I'm going to stop sharing here, and hopefully I'm going to throw this question out to you, these questions out to you. Actually, now that I realize it, maybe it's better to share this, because my questions are there. Let's see if I get this. What makes a good philosophical conversation, and what makes a philosophical conversation uncomfortable? And my problem is now a tech problem, because if I show you this, I can't see any responses. I could hear people if they jump up, but okay. So that's the question. Let's put that out there, and it would be great if folks would either enter into chat, or if they can speak up. What makes good conversation, and in philosophy, a fun and productive conversation, and what makes philosophical conversation uncomfortable?
Russell, can you hear me?
I can, Jennifer.
Okay, so I think folks can unmute, and I'll be happy to read from the chat if you can't see it. I'll throw out an idea. I think conviction makes for both a productive and healthy philosophical conversation, and also difficult and challenging ones.
Right, both. That's great. Yeah, I'm uh, looking at the chat here, not seeing much yet. Leading to unexpected place. Thanks, Alita. Right. Conversation partners are able to follow to that place, and that's a trick, right? In the classroom, it's including all our students can be tricky. Too much jargon, it's hard to follow. Yeah, we need to, thanks Frederick, we need definitely to bring our students along and put them in a place where they can have those conversations, they can access the details of those conversations. Generosity. Thanks, Alyssa. That's great. Well, these are wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Darren. That's a really great point. It may be that what's uncomfortable now will turn out, we can look back at that and realize that it's a learning experience. Too fast and intense. Yeah, we've got to be wary, especially as a teacher, right? We've got to be really wary about the about excluding students just because they get overwhelmed emotionally by the raw philosophy. Fear of judgment and criticism. Thanks, Cassie. That's great. Yeah, yeah. That's we really have to be, as teachers, especially aware of the power of our words. Safe to be uncomfortable. I love that. Thanks, Ronnie. Hi, Michael. Thanks. Yeah, different understandings of the terms. That right. We have to kind of put ourselves on try to get some sort of level playing field for that conversation. This is great. Okay, so I see conversation winding down. I'd be happy to continue with that in the chat. I'm going to share my screen again and just say a few more words about what I think is essential to good conversation, and that is trust, mutual trust. So I really think that in order to have productive conversation, I think this connects with lots of what we saw in the chat there in this conversation. We have to trust that what we say is going to be heard and is not going to be denigrated. We're not going to be humiliated by responses to it. We don't need people always to agree with us. We can agree to disagree around a lot of questions. And if your students are anything like mine, they're willing to tolerate a lot of disagreement as long as they understand that they're being heard and that they are not going to be harmed by the conversation. We can agree to disagree, but we need to feel that people are listening. Neuroscientist and neuroeconomist Paul Zak gives a bunch of reasons, a bunch of ways to build trust. He's really taking this for in a corporate environment, but I think they are useful in the classroom. So he studies how the brain produces oxytocin in responding to stress and how oxytocin facilitates trusting relationships. And there's some debate about this research, but the ideas are good ones. It seems to me easily adaptable to our classroom contexts. They sound like advice for building a fun and trusting classroom to me, recognizing excellence in our students, inducing challenge stress. Tasks should be not overly easy, but not overly difficult. We have to let people make choices about what work they do and how they do it. Share information, especially about our process and why and how we're doing things, and of course the baseline definitions and meanings of terms that we're using. Intentionally build relationships and facilitate whole person growth, and showing vulnerability, especially from the instructor. That's super important in helping students to trust us. So, but this is all pretty abstract. I think they're pretty good. There's pretty good advice, but we need some specific mechanisms for building trust. And dare I say, in this political climate, inclusion. Um, that's where the teacher's expertise in a post-content transmission classroom shows up. We know the good conversations to have. We know what the live debates are. Our students who are just learning the topics we're teaching need help entering those conversations. So our role is to help empower them, to provide challenge stress and vulnerability. Here's a helpful hint. Never ask a question whose answer you know, or at least try to avoid those kinds of questions. So I'll give an example of the kind of activity that I'm talking about, helping students enter into philosophical conversation. And this is one from I do in my early modern class. It's the last day of I use it in the last day of a unit on free will. And students in class are familiar with concepts at this point like libertarianism and hard determinism and compatibilism. And now what they have to do is apply their learning to a concrete case. It's a complex task, and it's an important one. different students are sure to come to it with different perspectives. So here's what I'm asking students to do. I give them 6 prominent justifications for punishment. We don't really even talk about this so much. Quick definitions are satisfied. There's not they can get these pretty naturally. Those 6 justifications for punishments. It's not really what we've been studying, but I introduce them, and then I do this for a variety of cases. I'm only giving you one. Yep.
Encourages.
I'm sorry. Are we good? Okay. So here's a particular case that a student assistant of mine cooked up, and then we're asking students to, as first individually and then as a team working in groups, to rank the top 3 of those given reasons for punishment in this case and in others. And the conversations that ensue here are always lively and engaged. And I just sit there kind of twiddling my thumbs. So thanks very much. I'm happy to talk about any of this. And I will stop sharing my screen and open it up. We can talk in chat. We can talk in. People can turn off their, open their mics and speak up. Dave can help.
Yes, please feel free to unmute if you have a question or put it in the chat.
I can kick things off. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how to address the feelings of clarity that students often get in conversations when they feel like they totally know what somebody else is saying, but they really don't and haven't done that work to clear up terms or whatever. How can we better disrupt when they feel like they're in a conversational flow, but really they're talking past each other?
That's a great question, Cassie. And I wonder, I'm happy for other people to say things. I'll say something sort of complicated, which is that I'm doing this kind of work in team-based learning classrooms in which students are building, they're in permanent groups for the term. And so they're building relationships within the teams. The teams are typically 4 to 7 people in the team, and they are just working on activities like that one for class time through the term. And so they get to know each other along the way quite well. And we also do a lot of peer evaluation. So we do peer evaluation 3 times during the term, and that helps to build the kinds of trust within the team so that people can speak up. And the hope is that they speak up with each other. So we've got to figure out how to empower them to really say those things, like, I don't understand the terms you're using, or yeah, to hold each other accountable. So that individual accountability gets built in both by peer evaluation and by some of the structures of the assignments. So yeah, it's complicated, and it's a great question. How can we get them to really be honest and candid with each other? And that's what I'm urging them to do during that peer evaluation process. For a truly great teacher, I would say nothing. That's right. The decentering of oneself in the classroom is just it feels weird when I'm sitting in front of the class and students are working and I'm kind of sitting there thinking about the next activity and how am I going to respond to things. But as Dave Concepción taught me, and really this comes from what's his name? Dave will remind us. The one who does the work is the one who does the learning. And I do the work in preparation for class, but in class I want the students to be doing that work.
I'll pop in with a question.
Awesome.
So, okay, one thing that I've discovered is that the things that I used to think were kind of silly and cheesy and like setting up classroom tone early on actually work really well. So I finally committed in one of my classes to doing this, like, let's build norms together in the first week. And I really noticed a difference in the tone, but I have not done that in all my classes. And I'm wondering if you have any advice on like, if I didn't build trust successfully the very first week, and I feel like maybe the vibe got off to a weird foot, like how do you build that back when maybe there's already some entrenched norms that you don't like? Like shifting those norms feels way harder when I forgot to build them than the first week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think my wife has joined us here, so this is a little dangerous what I'm about to say, but trust is really hard, and I don't know that I trust anybody really. Right? It's an ongoing process. So I think there's nothing you can do at the beginning of your class that really determines trust. And there's and the good news about that is that it's always an ongoing process, right? It's always something that you're working on in a classroom. It's how you listen to students and how you help them to listen to each other. Um, I think that developing expectations for them to talk to each other, right? One thing that I do in addition to having students in permanent teams is when we are talking as a class. So teams will do activities and then we get together and talk as a whole class. And I typically use what we call a floating chair model of conversation, which is another way of decentering the instruction at the instructor and forcing them to talk to each other. So whoever's talking gets to pick the next person. And I only jump in when they want me to jump in. And this, I think, forcing them to talk with each other and communicate with each other and not to rely on you. I think those are important. But in terms of specific mechanisms for building, there's no magic wand for trust. That's a hard one. It's ongoing. And I think, you have to start with respect for students and showing your own vulnerability. I wonder if other people, like for instance, my co-panelist Dave, who has not yet spoken, except to remind us that it was Terry Doyle who says that about the one who does the work is the one who does the learning.
Yeah, the comments are also really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alyssa.
So I will jump in, Russell.
Thanks, Kimberly.
And yeah, no, so one of the really common feedback that one gets when they do this is that students complain that they're teaching themselves. Have you gotten that, and how have you addressed that?
No, I don't get that. I don't, they see the hard work that I do, I think. I know that when students are unmoored a little bit, they can feel like, well, I paid for an instructor. And I've seen it a little bit at the beginning of classes. Students will raise that question for me. But I think one thing I do is very quick responses to their written work, as immediate feedback as we can. That helps build like their understanding that I'm there and working with them. And just I think the activities that I design are careful. They see how carefully I've designed those activities, so I think they get it. But I know that's a challenge that others have. Oh, we've got one of my students in here who is saying says no. So there you go. All right, that's an anecdote, but not. Thanks, Michael. Midterm surveys, Kimberly, is a great idea. Hey, I wonder if we should turn it over to Dave. Dave's got some great ideas about other ways of creating this kind of engagement, not just this team-based learning track that I'm always on.
I'm ready to go if you all are.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Russell. Dave, are you set up?
Okay, if you can hear me and see me, I am.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, because boy, that was a struggle. I had to try 3 different browsers to get in. Well, howdy everybody. Thanks for coming. D-Fink, who if you know me, you know I always refer to him because he's the guy who taught me everything I know, I guess. He says the single biggest improvement most teachers can make is to give students more doing and observing experiences related to the subject. Direct experiences are the most powerful. So I'm going to take you through a workshop exercise, which is not a good fit for this format, but we'll struggle through. I want to ask you about your doings. But let me set it up a bit. Let me give a little context. You know, when you have to write your teaching statement, and they ask you for a metaphor, you know, and you certainly can't say guide on the side. You can be Anthony Weston and say an impresario with a scenario. Like, that's my favorite one. But mine is that I am an activity designer who provides feedback. Like, that's what I think I do. I happen to know something about philosophy, but my job is to design activities. And if people participate in those activities, they will learn. That is, they will teach themselves things by doing things. As Terry Doyle says, the one who does the work does the learning. The one yapping is probably not doing the learning. That would be me right now. So the key for fun in-class stuff, festive learning, stuff about engagement, how can people have a good time in class and be learning? I want to make clear that fun should not be the goal, but it's the predicted and natural side effect of being engaged, right? So nobody's recommending that anybody be an entertainer here, but if you find out if your students don't look like they're having fun every day, they're not learning as much as you could help them learn. That's probably not true 100% of the time, but boy, is it a good guiding rule. Are people laughing? Are they talking to each other? Are they having fun? Okay, so I want to take you through this, like Carl did in an earlier session, to help you electrify your thinking here. If you could just pick a particular class that you teach and focus your mental energy on that one class, because when you jump around from class to class, the contexts are different and you change your mind. So you got a class picked, all right? For that class, what is your primary aspiration for the students by the end of the semester? You can think of it as like if you bumped into the student in a grocery store 3 years later and you say, hey, what stuck with you? What was valuable from taking that class with me? What do you hope they would say back? That's your aspiration. I hope putting it this way can knock you out of whatever administrivia you get forced down your throat about learning objectives, having active verbs and 3 bullet points, and these insane arguments about, are you talking about learning objectives or are you talking about learning goals? Or what's the difference between a course objective and a course, whatever. What do you hope, how do you hope students will be different after their time with you? So if you've got that, you're thinking about a particular class and there's something in particular you want. Obviously, it's nested within the goals approved on your primary syllabi at your institution and everything like that, but it's your manifestation of it. I'll just give you an example in case this is, in case I'm not being clear. I hope that my students experience an increase in their intellectual humility. That will show up in all kinds of ways, that disposition. It'll show up as being a more patient listener, being a better question asker, responding positively when criticized. There's a bunch of aspects of this, but intellectual humility. And so then I ask myself, well, what should people experience to increase that? One of the things they should do is experience a bunch of criticism. Another is that they should be trained in asking better questions, etc. Okay, so what I hope you have right now is a course specified in your head and a specific learning objective in your head. Just put like a thumbs up or a yes or something in the chat. And if anybody wants to ask a question about this setup right now, please ask, because then I'll turn it over to you in a second. right, thumbs are coming in. I think my chat is about 5 seconds behind reality. All right, well, let's give it a go then. We're going to play the gerund game. Think talks about doings. You might talk about learning activities. I just want any word that ends in ing. You've got a place you want your students to end up by the end of the class, and ask yourself, what things should they do? And your answer has to include ing. But I've got a couple rules here. You may not put on your list reading, listening, note taking, or writing, because everybody does those. You need gerunds other than that. I want to discourage you from using things like working in groups, because I think working in groups is too vague. Like, what manner of work are they doing? Are they explaining things to a classmate? That's more specific. Or are they helping a classmate figure out an idea? Right? So working in groups is so broad of a thing. I want to discourage you from using that as one of your doings. And you only may have 3 unobservable doings on your list. Unobservable doings are purely cognitive operations, like synthesizing. Synthesizing is a very valuable thing to do, but what I'm asking you for are behaviors that you could observe in a classroom. So I could see a student helping another student work out an idea. I can see that. So with those limitations, what I would like each of you to do is generate a list of 10 doings. Given the learning objective you gave yourself and the limitations on what you can put on your list, generate 10. So it has to be observable, specific, and not something you always do already. If there's questions about this, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here quietly for probably 3 minutes and let you make a list. All right, Cassie, you asked for it. Put a thumbs up or something in the chat if you have 10. If you do have 10, keep going. But let's see where everybody's at. How far along are you? Alita has 5. Alita's one of the most creative teachers I know. Come keep going. I'm going to tell you a story while you keep going. In my environmental ethics class, students have to write a paper justifying their choice of one of the four major views regarding direct moral considerability. Which do you think is correct, students? Anthropocentrism, sentientism, biocentrism, or ecocentrism? And what I found over the first few years was that most of the students went for sentientism or biocentrism. The ones who wanted to advocate for anthropocentrism somehow got a peer pressure vibe that their classmates did not want them to say that because it was a class called environmental ethics and it's self-selected for certain sorts of people. But what I discovered was that the students couldn't really take seriously ecocentrism, and many of them couldn't take seriously biocentrism. It wasn't that they were unpersuaded by them. It's that they couldn't take them seriously enough to give them a good run for their money. And so what I realized was this essay assignment is not challenging students enough because they're not really considering two of the four views that are on the table. So what I needed to do was take anthropocentrism and sentientism off the table and put students in a situation where they had to be directly between ecocentrism and biocentrism. So I decided to do a community engagement project, a service learning project. I partnered with a local land conservancy, and my students went out and killed invasive species to help these land conservancies. So they were killing individual plants for the health of a sort of microbiome region. So they were behaving in defense of biocentrism, in the defense of ecocentrism at the expense of biocentrism. And then they had to journal about it and write a paper. So what was my gerund? My students had a learning problem. They couldn't get to the objective I wanted because they couldn't take seriously the options. So what was my new gerund to help them learn more? Killing. Does that help, Alita? Killing is a possible gerund. I'm going to turn to your answers in 1 second. If you haven't ever seen it, in the natural sciences world, there's a competition among people defending their dissertations called Dance Your Dissertation. If you Google this and then click on the video thing, you will see a bunch of people dancing their dissertations. Is there a way that you could have your students dance something? Why isn't dancing one of the things students could do to advance towards your objectives? Okay, you've had enough time. I picked 10 because very few people can get to 10 after you take the easy ones off the list. So if you didn't get to 10, don't feel bad. That's totally normal. What I'd like you to do now is pop in your favorite one of the things you now have on your list. So you weren't allowed to put in, what you had to do was observable, specific, and not something you normally do. So presumably the things on your list are things you don't normally do. Of them, you might really like one of them. What's the new doing that maybe the past 15 minutes have helped you sort out? Kimberly does make hers dance.
I let them beg off today, but I do.
Yeah, I have my students do group drawings. Like at the beginning of class when I'm trying to make sure everybody's up to speed to do whatever we're going to do, like that they've got the content down from the homework. I'll put them in groups of 4 and I'll say, go in groups of 4, go up to the board and draw the main points of today's reading. And they have to figure out how to draw it. So drawing is a really, really good one, especially for content mastery at the beginning of a class. Role playing, acting, Wait a minute. It keeps moving. What was that one? Posterizing. Yep, Carl. Okay, I was in your session. Posterizing. Very good. Role playing, acting, improv. Yep. Walking. Biocentrism. They have to walk. Yeah. So that you can see how that's connected, right? Distinguishing, meme creating, imagining an audience. Oh, I could see that being so good for when you're trying to teach paper writing. Alyssa, I don't know who you are, but I love it. Both Christopher and Russell are on this distinguishing. One's about words and phrases that have multiple meanings. The other is about kinds of evidence, illustrating, touching grass. All right, Carl, I want that one. What learning objective is that connected to? How is doing that going to help students learn more? I was hoping people could chime in. Carl, can you get in here? Maybe not. All right. I'm looking for the fun ones. Ooh, self-forgiving. Wow. Okay. What's the Alita? Can you chime in? What's the learning objective connected to self-forgiving? Well, Jennifer or Cassie, is there some reason why folks can't chime in with audio?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear both of you.
Some folks may, their audio may not be working.
That is a crying
It's
shame.
been, I know it's been up and down with each session,
I
but
knew this was going to be tough in this setting, but
I mean, I can hop in if you really want to hear the touch grass.
I do. Okay, so it does work. There is a participant. Thank you. Yes.
So this one's got two senses. The first one is something that might fit in well with an environmental ethics course or any course where you want students to interrogate their use of technology. You know, if you're going outside, you're logging off your presumably desktop computer, you are outside, you're touching grass. I think that could be a valuable practice for some students. It also has a special connotation.
What learning? There's all kinds of things people could do that's valuable. I'm looking for a connection to a learning objective, though. How is touching grass connected to a learning objective of the class?
They are experiencing the world differently. They're choosing a road less traveled. So there's something there about autonomy. If you're walking on the grass rather than on the sidewalk, you're making a lot of choices. And I do think choices and agency matter a lot.
Good.
There's also a prohibition on walking on the grass at my institution. So there's something subversive there also.
You're teaching civil disobedience. That's one that would work. Alita, if you can get in, I'd really love to hear about self-forgiving. Darren, you want to tell us a connection, like how does daring someone connect to a learning objective for a class?
Well, first of all you have to do is assign anything to do with public speaking, doing anything with other people. Today's students are terrified of many things, but the one that I love is to not have a technology ban, but to to somehow encourage them to get away from their smartphone if they dare, which I find is quite terrifying for many of them. I have asked them to price how much would I have to pay you for you to get rid of it for a semester, and the prices are shocking, like in the millions. So, I don't have much to say, but I do think fear facing is vital.
Yeah, fear facing. Cassie, I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say with ouch oopsing. anybody who's lived in the DEI world has probably done this, but you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ouch, oops, whoa, which it's great that I think Ronnie shared the link to that in the chat, but I think that's a good one for helping with the intellectual humility, being okay with having said something wrong in some ways, or like normalizing that it's okay to make a mistake, and then let's address it without making a huge deal out of it, but still holding space for accountability and helping people to feel like there's less judgment in the space. So I think all of those pieces are really important for the intellectual humility goal or interpretive clarity goals.
I mean, I admire the way you connected that to a learning objective, but it's also like what I think what you're highlighting, and then the comments that are kind of tracking off you in the chat. There's also I'm making this up, but meta doings, right? Like we need certain things to happen so that we can do the other things that get the learning. And Kimberly's talking about calling in, and I don't know who knows what, but like when you call somebody out, you say publicly, like, I am offended by that. Typically, calling out is meant to embarrass someone or shun them from a community. It's often argued that it's justified when it's stopping an immediate harm that is taking place at that moment. Calling in is often thought of as an act of hope, right? That's like, oh, you said a thing that I find offensive and or problematic. I'd like to speak to you more about that, right? And the reason it's a practice of hope is that it basically communicates, I want to continue my relationship with you in a very positive way. And what you just did was going to get in the way of that in some way if we don't talk through it. So calling in, calling out, great. Frederick, what about lying down? I see that you're connecting it to learning objectives in a death and dying class. Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so the idea is to kind of get them to like experience what is it like to just be on the ground and not doing anything, closer to like a state of death. And then from there they can do things like they can do reflecting back on their lives and stuff like that.
I would think that is, I would find that challenging because first of all, the floor is often dirty in schools.
Oh yeah.
But it's not quite the same as death. I think like the reflection piece on that would be really interesting. Like asking them a question like, how does the metaphor I'm trying to draw here work, and how does it not work? I think that's actually that type of question is a super good question to ask. Like when you ask students to do something, you've got a reason for thinking that it's a valuable thing to do, and you can ask them, hey, I thought this was going to do this. Did it? And if it didn't, what did it do? And those can be like the minute paper they give to walk out the door. All right, given the time, I want to try to round something out here, and then we can have a moment or two for more open Q&A or more chat. Some people might have expected that they were going to get specific ideas for in-class activities they can do by coming to this session. So just a couple. The number one thing that I do to get festive learning is I use home groups. I teach on Tuesday, Thursday, so I do have longer classes. But for the first 5 minutes of every class, I have students in groups, and it's the same students in the same groups throughout half the semester. Usually then I swap them at some point midway. So their task is to come in, sit down, do not look at their phones, and talk to each other. That's the first 5 minutes. How was your weekend? Did you see the football game? Whatever. And so it's a way to get them away from their phones, but it's also a way to build belonging, comradeship, trust, right? That they just feel good, they feel seen, they're there with human beings in a human space. That's a kind of meta engagement. Again, it's the kind of thing that sets up the room for success. My favorite doings in class, one of them is collaborative drawing, which I already said. A second one is lineups. When you have a topic that admits of some sort of continuum, where you could believe this or this or this or this. It's not an either or kind of position on something. I will ask students to physically line up in the room. Just to keep with the example I was giving before, I'll say anthropocentrists to my left, then sentientists, then biocentrists, then ecocentrists to the right. And they have to line up, and they have to line up single file. So often we end up out in the hall because they have to talk to each other like, how strongly anthropocentric are you? And what do you think biocentrism lets in and doesn't let in? You know, what about bacteria? And so this is another way for them to figure out what they think while helping each other develop their content knowledge. It's called a lineup. And then this last one, there's all kinds of forms of this. I call it popcorn questions because I like to do it this way. It's more fun. You might have students just write on a piece of paper a random question and they could hand it in, and then I shuffle them up and hand them back out to other people. And then if the student who receives the question that is not theirs likes that question, they ask it, and they can ask any question they want. Like presumably it's on some topic we're talking about. But the students decide which questions seem like good questions, so they end up filtering the questions for me relative to their own values. I call them popcorn questions. I stole this from Mo, because you crinkle up the piece of paper like it's a piece of popcorn and you throw it at me. Like I stand in the middle of the room and they get to throw pieces of paper at me, and then I pick up the paper and hand them out. So those are just a few doings you could do in class. The point of this session, or my half of this session, was to help you. Yeah, Mo Jansen. Yeah, to help you give you a process to think your way into your own engagements. Right? It's like, what do people need to do to learn what I hope they will learn? And it can be anything at all. It can be killing. It could be, social loafing. Nice. Kvetching. Nice. Yeah. Complaining. Yeah. Complaining is, I haven't thought about complaining. That's a really good one. All right. So we've got, I think we have 9 minutes left, just for open Q&A. Questions for Russell, questions for me. You want to just explain your favorite gerund that you came up with today? What are you thinking, people?
Well, I'll just say, David, that I think this is a great way to work on some backwards design. You know, to start with the gerunds and work backwards. It's a really hard activity to think about. It really requires reframing how we think about our teaching in terms of active, goals for students, what they can do as opposed to what they can know.
Yeah, I mean, I hope to emphasize in a couple of my examples that many of the doings are to help students get content mastery. Right? So if your goal is that students learn, what Descartes said, the approach is still, what should they do to learn what Descartes said? And it might be like, I've had students play telephone line. Like I've had students play two truths and a lie about Descartes. Like what does Descartes say this? And they have to invent the lie to try to get it, and they get like points if they get people to successfully say that Descartes said the thing that's a lie. So they have to know the content well to get a convincing lie, right? So this isn't just about having skill-based or disposition-based learning objectives. Your learning objective can be content-centered, but students need to do something to master the content. So it's still, what should they be doing? Stealing. Ronnie, you want to talk to us about stealing? it's from the session. What should students steal from you?
I want to push you a little bit though, Dave, on that content mastery. I mean, I love philosophical content, but for most of our students, the I think that the concepts that they learn and how they apply them and what kinds of activities are typically that's the kind of stuff that when I run into them 3 years down the road, I don't care. I remember running into a former student who recited the formula of universal law of Kant's categorical imperative to me, like as proof that they had learned something, and I was not sure they had learned anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, if this were a different session and we were going to try to evaluate the enduring value of various kinds of learning objectives, most content mastery is lower on my list.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the point. I mean, I wasn't trying to make that point. I was just trying to say, if that's what you're after, you still want to run your thinking through this as a pedagogue, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm sure
flashcard is a thing you could do to learn Descartes, or try to make up lies about Descartes is something you could do to learn Descartes, right? Like, how many things could you do? Carl put thanking in the chat, and I think he was just following Cassie saying thank you. But one thing that we often do in AAPT seminars is end with gratitude statements. We have participants in sessions thank other participants for things. I've done that in class. I do it more in the middle of the semester once there's enough rapport, and then it really helps people. It helps people see what their classmates value in comments and feedback, and it actually activates them to try to engage in those thanked behaviors.
I love that, Dave. And I'll say something slightly more specific. Maybe what I ask students to do is on a midterm evaluation is provide specific examples of how their teams have helped them learn. Right. Yeah. So that's a way of thanking each other, and it forces them to do that metacognition about like why these trusting relationships, which are so much fun, which make class really engaging for students, right? Why they're also helpful for learning.
Yeah. I've got a note from Cassie, very politely hidden in a private chat, that we're closing in on the end, so I will hand it back to Cassie.
I think Cassie may be over in Topia, where we are gathering for just a little social time. If you can make it, please hop over there. The link is in the chat. And on that note of gratitude, I'd like to express our gratitude to both David Concepción and Russell Marcus for being our speakers for our public session and for closing out our 2025 AAPT APA Teaching Hub at the Central Division meeting. We're so grateful to both of you. Thanks for all of the attendance and great questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you over in Topia.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, you. Take care.